Welcome into this week's episode of Free True Values. I'm your host, James Fletcher, here to talk to you about all things happening across the sport that we love. It is March. There is madness happening all over the country. We have mid-major tournaments that are raging on. We have bracketology updates through the final week of the regular season. We have had plenty of big-time results over the last 48 hours or so, which have shaped what we're going to see both at the top of bracketology and at the bottom as we talk about the bubble. So today's episode is going to be largely about bracketology. We will get here into both the top of the bracket in the first segment and then the bottom of the bracket in the second segment. So we're going to talk through pretty much the whole field here. We will go kind of top half and then bottom half in the next segment. That's the plan. And then we will do our last games of the week segment to close out the show today. Next week, no real sense in doing games of the week because we will not know any of the matchups beyond day one, really. And then moving forward, you really should be locked into everything happening across these conference tournaments, particularly those high major ones that will be concluding at the end of next week. So we will run you through all that and more right here. If you have not, please subscribe to the show. We will have plenty of content over this next month and into April, of course, into the off season as well. We're going to have more coming on this channel. March Madness is kind of the pinnacle, yes, but we will have, of course, off-season content as it relates to head coaches, the coaching carousel, what's going on there, the transfer portal, the latest going on, and of course, we will do much more in-depth NBA draft talk. That will be coming just after the end of the NCAA tournament. We've got a lot to unpack here this month, and then we have a lot of time to sort through what we've seen over the past few months from these prospects, start talking about international prospects, everything else along the way. So before we get into that, we have a lot of business to take care of. So let's go ahead and get straight into things today. We're talking about the top of the bracket here. Auburn is the number one overall seed still. They drop a game against Texas A&M this week. Of course, comes off the back of some good performances from Auburn. They have separated themselves from the rest of the field here in college basketball. There's really no question. Auburn should be the number one overall seed, barring almost any result the rest of the way. Yes, that's right. They take a loss. Duke continues to win, and Auburn still has enough cushion that I think if they lost over the weekend against Alabama, they would likely remain the number one overall seed. The difference here is in the quadrant system. Now, if you look, some of the metrics actually have Duke coming close to Auburn. They've passed them in the net in Kim Pom, in Bart Torvik, but the one place where they are not close, cannot touch what Auburn has been able to do, is wins above the bubble. Strength of record, the new version of strength of record that the committee is looking at this season. So we then go to the quadrant system. We try to confirm what we are seeing in the computer numbers. It tells the same story. Auburn has done more in quad one than anyone has ever done since its inception. They are on a historic run here. And so, yes, they've taken a couple of losses now, but they still have a comparable record overall. And the strength of that record is so far ahead of the competition. So Auburn remains your number one overall seed. I think the only path here for Duke to surpass them would be if Auburn were to drop this upcoming game against Alabama and then drop their first or potentially second game in the SEC tournament. That second game would depend on who it comes against. But the reason, because I've just said how far the resume has separated between Auburn and Duke. And so the records, even if Auburn took that one additional loss, they end up, say, with one more loss on the season than Duke ends with. I still would give Auburn the edge as the number 1 overall seed unless we are entering under the circumstances where we look at Auburn entering on an extended losing streak here. It would be 3 in a row if they were to drop the game against Alabama and then drop another game in the SEC tournament right off the bat. So you start to look at them differently. Are they the same team that accumulated all of those results because they had not shown it recently? That would be the argument to then move Duke to number 1 on the board. That's enough talk about those top 2 teams because we're going to see, like I said, only one path that plays out there. Houston is interesting as the 3rd team on the 1 seed line. I think they're starting to create some separation, and I think this was sort of what was maybe not inevitable, but it seemed more and more likely as their resume built up. And I talked about them having the resume of a 1 seed team, but they weren't quite there. They were the number 6 seed, the number 5 overall seed. They kept landing on that 2 line, but I kept saying it's a matter of time with this resume before they end up on the 1 seed line. That, of course, came because if you look, there are 3 SEC teams right below them. So with those 3 teams having to play each other, having to play the SEC schedule, Houston cruising through the Big 12 the way that they were eventually going to move up simply because the other teams were moving down. Now, as we look at this race for the final number 1 overall seed, I think we have really narrowed it down. We have truly cut the list to 4 teams. There are 4 teams in contention for this last spot on the seed line. You have Florida, who is currently there in the latest bracketology update at On3 that I have published this morning. Florida gets the edge because if you look at their resume, they boast wins over Auburn on the road, Alabama on the road. They beat Tennessee by 30 earlier this season. That's about as good as you can do. That's 2 wins over the teams that you are competing with. Now, Tennessee got them back. So they are 1-1 on the season against Tennessee. So there's no significant differentiator there because the season series is tied, but they did dominate them in one of those games. So that kind of raises the eyebrow just a little bit. You add on top of that their computer numbers continue to improve as they would be expected to with those type of wins that we are discussing. They do not have necessarily the same quadrant strength head-to-head, but more opportunities coming in the SEC tournament, more opportunities here in the last week of the regular season in the SEC. So right now, Florida appears to have that slight edge, and then it is Alabama and Tennessee. This is as close as a draw as you can come to. Alabama has 1 more overall loss, but stronger on wins above the bubble. Alabama, number 2 overall still. They retain that position even with some recent losses, and I think that tells a lot about what Alabama has done to this point. So they have a game upcoming against Auburn. That one will be huge because that is, of course, the trump card win that you can pull out at the end of the season. But ultimately, as we talk about these 3 teams, I don't think any of them are going to fully rule themselves out over this weekend. I think that this goes into the SEC tournament, and it could very well come down to which team makes the deepest run. Which of these 3 teams is able to make it all the way to the championship game if that means losing to Auburn. If Auburn is eliminated along the way, which one of them can lift the trophy? I think our SEC champion is going to make it into that 1 seed position. It is more than likely going to be one of the teams that we are discussing. And I think that we could definitely see whichever one of these 3 teams finishes the deepest into the weekend. That's who you could see. Now, gets really interesting if they all are eliminated around the same time. At least 2 of them could be eliminated on the second to last day. That would put us in some really interesting territory as we try to figure out what to do with the bracket. The last team, though, that has a shot here at landing on the 1 seed line is Michigan State. Because if chaos breaks out, if these teams beat up on each other, if they make some early exits from the SEC tournament, Michigan State has the ability to run the table. They have that buildup of quad one wins that can put them in this mix. And they would, of course, accumulate more and more quad one wins along the way to doing so. So they're not completely ruled out of this. I think that there is a real case that could be made. They will have to play strong, of course, through the course of those games in order to get all of those numbers to line up with the eye test, with the paper resume. There's a lot that goes into this to get them up. But I do think that they are still in play in a way that no one else across the country really is. So we talk about this next tier of teams, and I'm signaling to you that I do not believe they will make it all the way to the 1 seed line. But that does not mean they cannot create an advantage. You want to be the 2 seed. That is an incredible advantage all the way through. The 3 seed, you want to stay out of the 4 seed. You don't want to go down to 5 below that because, of course, your path gets tougher as you move into that territory. So Wisconsin, Kentucky, Texas Tech, Iowa State, and St. John's. Those teams are incredibly close. So that is the tail end of the 2 seed line with the full 3 seed line. You could really rank these in any order that you want. And I think that's a really fascinating position for us to find ourselves in this late in the process. Because we also have teams, the only two that I just mentioned of those 5 in the same conference are Texas Tech and Iowa State. So we're not even going to see these teams go head to head in order to shift things before we get to Selection Sunday. So what we're going to look at is the results that they're able to pick up and the strength of those results along the way. It will be fascinating. I do believe that the margins are thin enough there for that final 2 seed spot, and then, of course, across that 3 seed line, that you could see teams that pick up wins still drop if we update the numbers at the right time. Because perhaps one of the teams below them picked up a better win, just the way that the bracket fell in their conference tournament or over the course of this final weekend. You could see some of that jockeying up and down just based off the changes in the strength of competition that they play, the strength of competition that they beat or lose to if we find ourselves in that position. We talk here about the 4 seed line a little bit. Texas A&M, Purdue, Arizona, and Maryland currently on it. Missouri, Ole Miss. Ole Miss makes a surge here, of course, with their win against Tennessee. Clemson in the mix there a little bit on the outside looking in. Not sure if they can quite reach the 4 seed line. Michigan definitely can. They're up there as well. And then we get down into the below the 5 seed line. We get into 6 and 7. I think the 6 and 7 lines are going to be fascinating because you've got a couple of teams that are going to be ranked a little bit higher than their computer numbers, and a couple of teams that are going to be ranked a little bit lower than their computer numbers based on the eye test, based off the paper resume, the things that we look at outside of that. So it's going to be the place in the bracket that you're going to want to pay close attention to as you're trying to figure out, is this a team that is on the way up, a team that is on the way down? Is this a team that has a great resume but does not necessarily have the computer numbers to back it up, or a team that has the computer numbers all in a row, but the resume doesn't really suggest they've been that good? That's going to be the interesting thing to look at as we try to figure out which of these 6 and 7 seeds can make deeper runs, can challenge on their way through the bracket. When we come back on the other side, we will take you through the rest of the at-large field with, of course, some automatic qualifiers sprinkled in as well. We'll talk about seeds 8 down through the bubble right here on 3 True Values. Thanks for tuning in. Welcome back in as we keep rolling through the show today, right here on 3 True Values. We have to talk about the NCAA Tournament bubble. We got through the top seeds in the first segment. Now it's time to talk about the teams that are still sweating things out. Now, we're going to start with the 8 and 9 seeds. I think they're pretty safely in at this point, to be completely honest with you, because of what we will talk about once we get to the bubble. But let's go ahead and roll through those. We'll knock those out real quick here. We've got BYU. I think they have a case to move up even from where they're at. The problem is going to be breaking through some of the teams that are above them. And that's what I found here on this 8 seed line and these 9 seed teams as well, is that they are good teams. They're respectable teams. They're teams that honestly you probably don't want to see in the second round if you're a 1 seed. There are teams like BYU who have been on this incredible run of form, or teams that we have seen extreme heights from. UConn in this mix. I mean, yes, they haven't shown their full potential all year, but they're the back-to-back national champions. So a lot of teams that you don't necessarily want to face for one reason or another, but they're just having a hard time in all of the metrics that we look at breaking through to that next tier. And so these 8-9 games are going to be fascinating because I think we're going to get some intriguing matchups of teams that have something that you really like, but it hasn't quite broken through. It hasn't quite lined up the way that it potentially should. But as we know, teams can unlock things in March and go on magical runs. So be on the lookout for those 2 seed lines for sure. Also have New Mexico up there on that 9 seed line currently. They would get the automatic bid, of course, from the Mountain West as well, as they lead that conference today. The Mountain West is an interesting one because there is still the opportunity that they could send a team that wouldn't necessarily be an at-large contender into the field with a conference tournament win. Most likely that would mean Boise State, could also mean San Diego State, but I don't think, regardless of that, I don't think that we would see that team that wins enter the field below the bubble, meaning that they would be below the play-in games in terms of seeding. Don't think that we would see that because I think that running through the Mountain West Conference gives you enough strong wins. We've got San Diego State and Boise State both close enough there on the bubble that it would get them into the field, especially given the state of this bubble. But as we move down to the 10 seed line, it's an interesting group of teams. It's got Georgia and Arkansas, as well as Ohio State, as well as Utah State, and then VCU. So VCU, another one of these teams that is in there into an at-large position in the bracket, but they are getting the automatic bid. They would be cutting it extremely close on the bubble. And if there is a bid stealer in the A10, it could really shake things up on this bubble. It could make some of these teams sweat just that much more, whether they are going to make it into the tournament field, because VCU has every case to be in the field. Like, their computer numbers are incredible. So watch out. If VCU loses in their conference tournament, some teams are going to have to turn something on and try to make that one last case to the committee that they belong in the field. We look, though, at Georgia and Arkansas here. I think they're the 2 most fascinating of this group that we're talking about because they've been up and down the bubble. Some people had Georgia outside the field. I never moved them outside the field. I always believed that their resume was strong enough that their computer numbers supported them being in the field, regardless of the skid that they went on for a short time there. Now, they came close, but they righted the ship against Florida. That should mean something. They move up the board. They have continued to pick up results since then. And so now that they've got things pointed in the right direction, I don't see much of a path for them to fall out of the tournament field now. And as we talk about the SEC, that's important because they are the record setting team. They are the 11th team in terms of the rankings in this field. Arkansas, right below them, would be 12, which would break the record, reset the record of the Big East from years ago. So, Arkansas, also in an interesting position. They have kind of fluctuated down towards the bubble. They looked like they were going to be safe, and then they took some losses. They bounce back. They get an important win in the midweek slate. I think they've got just enough cushion there that likely they will be in, but I don't think they can just go and lose two straight games in big fashion. I think they've got to continue to play this out and play strong if they want to find themselves on the right side of the bubble. As we look at the 11 seeds, here's where we get into an interesting territory. We've got West Virginia and North Carolina. Both of those teams could easily be on the bubble. West Virginia is one that there is a case to be made to move them up. But the more that you look at their resume, the more that you look at their computer numbers, you just question, are they in the same tier? Should they be above some of these teams? And right now, I don't think you can make that case quite yet. Now, they're going to play in the Big 12 tournament, and I think it will be, as it will for all these bubble teams, don't get me wrong, vitally important. Because they are a couple of big wins, a couple of pretty good wins, to be completely honest, from close to solidifying their spot. The problem is, if they take another bad loss, you have some real serious questions about their resume because some of the numbers just don't add up. North Carolina, on the other hand, I know that some people still have them on the wrong side of the bubble, and I understand that because they don't have many strong wins on the resume. But at the end of the day, here's where I land on North Carolina. One, and I don't think that this can be completely dismissed. I don't want it to come off as the important part of this conversation, so I want to get it out of the way. But they're a blue blood, and this is a TV product at the end of the day. Now, into the actual important part of why they are above the play-in right now, in my eyes. They're on a win streak. That's it. They are winning basketball games. And that is more than you have been able to ask from many of these bubble teams over the last couple of weeks. We just talked about some of them that have just dropped games, gone on long skids, can't figure it out. North Carolina, meanwhile, they look like they might have something figured out. And so the eye test is all in favor of North Carolina right now. They look like a different team. They have started to string together results. They are winning games that they should win more often than not in the way that they should win them. And so I'm going to place value on that, on what is a weak bubble. And there we go. We'll say it. It is a weak bubble. When there's a weak bubble and a team is rattling off results and they look the part, I'm going to put them in the field at the end of the day. And it's not like the numbers don't support that. It'd be one thing if they were further down, like a team like SMU. If a team with SMU's resume was looking the part, you would have to give it serious consideration. But man, there's just no quad one wins. What are you going to do? You've got to pick something up along the way. And SMU is a team that needs to pick up. They have to make a deep run in the ACC tournament, which is unfortunate for them because their record is good. They just haven't beat anyone of note. They've taken care of all of the easy games. So now we move in to March, and they've got a lot to do. But North Carolina, as long as they keep rolling here, look, if they beat Duke, they're in the field. That's hands down. There's no question about it. Even if they take that loss, as long as they get through the ACC tournament into the quarterfinal, into the semifinal, and take a loss against one of the three teams that is pretty solidly in the field, I think they're fine. Don't have any concerns about North Carolina unless they take a concerning loss. then they might not make the field. And look, this is not to say that they won't be in that last four in category if we're talking about that. There's every opportunity that that's where they end up as well, because you would take a loss to Duke, potentially take another loss in the ACC tournament. That's two more losses on your resume. That's going to drop you. Now, what's on their side? Most of these teams are going to take a loss before the end of the season. We talk about UC San Diego, still got them just right there. I'm not sure if they're going to be above or below the bubble when it comes to their automatic bid at this time. I do think they have to win the conference tournament still. UC Irvine would replace them. Maybe not. I think UC Irvine would definitely go below the bubble. UC San Diego, there is still a case on either side. Ohio State, as we go into the last four in here, Ohio State has all the computer numbers, but they've taken quite a few losses. And so that's what the committee is going to have to weigh when they look at this Ohio State resume is, man, they have racked up losses. But they haven't really, they've got all the computer numbers to say that they're good. So what do we do with that? It's going to be interesting to see where they land on Ohio State. I think it's a real litmus test for what the selection committee believes in. Texas and Oklahoma. That final regular season game is going to be something to behold, because it might not be the biggest, look, there's Auburn, Alabama is going to be this weekend. Duke, North Carolina is this weekend. Texas, Oklahoma might have the most on the line. Whichever team wins that game will be in the bracketology field on Sunday morning. Whichever team loses will not. It's that simple. This is a vitally important game because you do not want to go into the SEC tournament on the wrong side of things. Because if you do, you're going to have to win at least a couple of games to feel good heading into Selection Sunday. And those are not easy games to win, of course, as we know. So this Texas-Oklahoma game will mean everything for both of those programs, with so much on the line there. Xavier. Now, Xavier, they are the last team in the field right now for me. And the reason is the same as the reason for North Carolina's rise. They're on a win streak. They keep putting together results. Nobody else around them is. So I'm going to give Xavier that spot for now. We'll see how they're able to keep going, because if they can string together a few more wins, I start to feel pretty good about this team being an NCAA tournament caliber team. Now, there are teams below them that are just itching to jump in line. Those include, on top of Oklahoma, who we have discussed, Indiana, Boise State. Those are the two that I think are right there in range. Indiana is such a strange resume to try to break down. Their coach is retiring because of, in large part, results. It's a team that was expected to do big things. They haven't. They go on win streaks. They look good, but then they don't. They're all over the place. And so I'm not going to go out of my way to try to find a spot for them. They're going to have to go earn it to get into this field. Boise State, we talked about the Mountain West. They're probably going to have to make a deep run, potentially win the conference in order to find themselves on the right side of the bubble, because they're going to take a loss otherwise. They're bound to across somewhere in that tournament. Those are the teams that realistically can make the NCAA tournament field. Now, if we get a little bit further down, we talk about the bubble, because ultimately the bubble still has an impact on the NIT as well. And so SMU is right there. Look, like I said, they're going to have to make a deep ACC tournament run. And there's just not many quad one opportunities in the ACC, like plain and simple. I believe there would be 4. And that's, as provided that North Carolina continues to perform. So they're going to have to make a deep run to even get the opportunity to add to their resume. So a tough spot for SMU. Nebraska, look, they've just struggled too much. They take too many of these losses here down the stretch. Cincinnati, Same way, I do think Cincinnati, though, interestingly, has some kind of opportunity through the Big 12 tournament if they could go on some one of these magical runs. We saw NC State last year. I think they're in a similar position to where that team was. But the difference is we haven't really seen them turn it on yet. They just lost a game to Kansas State. Without that loss, they probably could have been up in the mix for the first four out. Instead, here they are. Colorado State, another Mountain West team that, like, yeah, sure, they could string together wins. They've beaten a couple of the big teams in recent weeks. So nothing suggesting that they can't make some kind of run through the conference tournament. And then Wake Forest rounds us out. Not sure if they can make it at this point. Their computer numbers are just so low. Welcome back in as we wrap up the show today. We've got a lot to watch, and so we're going to give you the games of the week, everything you need to watch over the next 7 days as we prepare for the home stretch. We're going to have some tickets punched into the NCAA tournament this weekend. So we're going to start tonight by watching the semifinals of the A-Sun tournament. How often? This is the first kind of chance we get to watch a semifinal matchup. So be sure to tune into at least one of those two games that you will have on the table. Then on Friday, we're going to watch Purdue and Illinois. Illinois, one of those teams trying to kind of improve their resume late. Purdue looking to continue to move up the board potentially into the 3 seed conversation. On Saturday, we're going to go with 3 games here. I know that's kind of cheating. That's not how we've done it before, but you got Alabama Auburn, and that's going to be a huge game because both of those are coming off of losses now. Auburn trying to cement their spot as the number 1 overall seed, make sure that they get a hold of that. With a win there, they would lock that up for good. There is nothing that could happen in the conference tournament to change that. On Alabama's side, if you want a 1 seed, you can go a long way in your pursuit of it by beating Auburn on the road. Second game, we're going to go Duke and North Carolina, the rivalry, the history of it. Now, I know there's been some conversation about, and ridiculous in my opinion, like this idea that this rivalry is washed up and that ESPN relies too much on it and they show too much of it. And like this season, sure, North Carolina is not the best North Carolina team that we've seen. But this rivalry, don't forget that like a couple of years ago, North Carolina ruined the storybook ending to Coach K's career. That meant something. We have seen buzzer beaters. We have seen fights. We have seen all kinds of things happen in recent memory between these two schools. So what about this rivalry is anything short of electric? I don't understand. Outside of the fact that one of the teams is clearly better on the court this year, there's just no case to argue against this rivalry as one of the best in college basketball. Does not make sense at all. So we're going to watch it because how many times have we seen the team that is struggling, that is kind of behind, pull off the upset and completely change things? Don't forget, that's what started the North Carolina run to the Final Four, which of course included 2 wins against Duke down that path. So we're going to watch that. And then finally, we talked about it in the last segment, Texas and Oklahoma will be facing off. That game has probably the most on the line of any that we could watch. On Sunday, we're going to see some tickets punched into the NCAA tournament. So find those, watch those games, because there will be some of them who are going to be that Cinderella pick, and you're going to want to put them on your bracket. You're going to like the matchup, and you're going to say, well, what did they play like? What kind of form are they in? You can find out on Sunday. You can watch them play and punch their ticket into the tournament. On Monday, we're going to go with the West Coast Conference semifinals. St. Mary's will be playing in one, Gonzaga in the other, usually on a crash course to meet each other in the championship, but that, of course, is not set in stone yet. Then on Tuesday, we've got plenty of conference tournament action. Don't have any set games yet, but we know that the Big 12 tournament will get underway. So let's watch the Big 12 tournament a little bit there, as well as we will have a couple of more tickets punched. So you want to tune in and see those. On Wednesday, that is when we will get the first round of the SEC tournament. And so bounce between some of the other tournaments and that one along the way. Like I said, this is the last time we will do the games of the week for the season. We will replace it with some other content here in this third segment, but the rest of the way, you're going to want to watch everything. So we're not going to take the time to break down which of those games, particularly when we don't generally know the matchups beyond 1 or 2 days the rest of the way. But we are here. We are in March Madness. We are going to see tickets punched. The next time we speak, we will be able to discuss all of the mid-major programs that will be headed to the NCAA tournament and have a little bit of an understanding of how the bubble sits. We'll talk about that and more right here on 3 True Values. Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, James Fletcher.